Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this program deals with a plethora of life issues. That means many, many life issues. Sometimes people think that the life issues simply are involved with pro-life abortion, but pro-life runs the spectrum from conception until natural death. And you know, we've been together a long time now. We've talked about so many things that pertain to human life and how human life can be made better, can be made holier, and how the Christian community has an obligation to nurture human life physically and mentally and spiritually. Now, we all know about Matthew 25. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. We know all of that stuff. We also have to be aware that there are people who, when I was homeless, you took me in. And we haven't really done a lot about homelessness, and it's a real plague in our society today. And in many of our cities, big cities and small cities, there are people who do not have a place to live. And even more sadly, the fact that there are children who are homeless. Well, we have a lady here today. She's walked the walk in her own life, what she experienced in her own life, but she is now talking the talk and doing something about homelessness, especially children who have no home. And she's not doing this like on a big scale, like, a government program, where you get a grant for millions of dollars and most of the money never ends up where it's supposed to end up. You get my point. It ends up, where sometimes? In the pockets of the politicians, the bureaucrats. No. Gospel calls us not to government programs. It calls us to what? To put ourselves out, to reach out to those who are in need. So we're going to introduce to you a lady named Jess Echeverry. Am I saying it correctly? Echeverry. Okay. Now, Jess, you tell us about your program, Sofesa? Sofisa.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, in 1999, I felt a calling to go back out to the streets. I spent 7 years housing unstable growing up, and now it was, I was older now. I was in a healthy relationship. I was established, and driving past homeless, I felt this voice say to me, go back out there. So when I first started going back out there, I started bringing socks and cookies, and just the message to me that was placed on my heart was just go because you know what it feels like, and just go out there and love them and be their friend.
So you were homeless as a child?
Yes. So my homelessness began at 14. I started running away from home. I experienced, I came from a broken home, which helps to create an environment for the trauma that I experienced. And at 10, I was molested, and at 12, I was raped. At that age, I just didn't have a voice. I didn't know how to share those things, and my home environment wasn't able to hear that as well, right? So that became boxed and shoved down inside of me, and it became rebellion and anger and just frustration. And so at 14, I began running away from home. And, that was rough. I ended up being obviously picked up by Child Protective Services and put in group homes and trying to figure out what to do with me. By 16, I was living with a relative, and I became pregnant. And that was really difficult because, at the time in my family, it was like you have to have an abortion if you want to continue staying here. And so I did try. I went 3 times into the abortion facility, each time getting in a little bit further, but I just couldn't do it. I left and ended up at a pregnancy center who helped show me, and where I learned for the first time that, being pregnant meant there was another person involved. It was a baby. So I ended up living briefly, because I was now homeless officially, with nowhere to go. I ended up living on the streets. I was in a crack and prostitution house for a certain amount of time. And that was just absolutely unbearable. And then I ended up staying at a maternity home for Christian mothers. And I stayed out my pregnancy there. At that time, they leaned more on releasing your baby for adoption. I wanted to keep my baby, but I had no support, none whatsoever. I had nothing in order to keep my baby, so I went along with the adoption plan. And I gave birth to my first child at 16, and I left the hospital without him. He was sent into foster care, actually. As it went, my ex-boyfriend, the father of my child, decided that he didn't want his child to go into an adoptive family and that his family would take him. So we went through the process of getting my firstborn, who's a boy, my son, back, and taking him over to his father's family's house. And that night, I wasn't allowed to stay. The baby was welcome, but due to their religious beliefs, I wasn't allowed to, be in the same house. And that was really my first night where I was alone and didn't have anywhere to truly go. And I'm 2 weeks postpartum. So, women out there who've had children before understand what it really emotionally feels like to be a postpartum woman. But I went to the beach. I laid down on the sand. I just thought, it's the most comfortable place. This was Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's where I grew up. I found the beach comforting, the sound of the waves. And I also thought, if I could just get through this first night, it's the East Coast, so it's where the sun rises. It literally comes up out of the water. If I could just get through this first night, if I could just see that sun come up over the water, I think I can do this. I think I can live this life. I can make it. Because my goal was obviously to survive. I still wanted to live and do things. So I did. I made it through the first night, and after that, I ended up encountering a group of other homeless individuals that, basically showed me the ropes and became my family. We were street kids in Fort Lauderdale, in and out of motels. Vista Mar, there's Covenant House, Florida down there. We worked the system to get in there and get what we needed and come out. And unfortunately, all of the trappings of being homeless, but it was a part of my experience. Drug deals, prostitution.
Okay, so you come out of this, rather well, I must say. I mean, what was the turning point for you? I mean, you say okay, I went to Covenant House, we worked the system. What was the turning point where you said, wait a minute, I got to get my life together? And then the point where you said, I'm going to do something, pay back other people who are in the same situation.
Yeah, no, of course. So I was doing what's called survival sex. And that is where a woman is in a relationship, an intimate relationship with a man, in order to have a roof over her head, maybe a car to drive. It's a form of sex trafficking, but that's where I was. I did end up getting pregnant again at 18, and I was so numb from the streets and what I experienced that I did end up in the abortion clinic and had an abortion. By the time I was 19, and after that abortion, that's when my desire to live ended. Now I attempted suicide. Now I didn't want to be around anymore. I didn't want to survive anymore like I used to. There was just this survival thing inside me. It's like, no matter what, I'm just going to keep going. But after my abortion, that was gone. And I attempted suicide at 19 and again at 20. Thank God.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, do you see the effect of evil? How destructive evil is? We hear so much today about divorce, and we kind of take it for granted. But a broken home does terrible damage to a child psychologically and spiritually. And then, as in the case with Jess here, we can see what's happened. It went from homelessness, pregnancy, abortion, sex slavery, drugs, alcohol. The evil one has so many tricks at his disposal. But God is bigger than the devil. Remember that, because Jess is talking about next how she got out of it. We want to hear about your resurrection experience.
Yes, absolutely. Well, by the time I turned 21, I was pregnant again. But I had gotten a restraining order after my abusive boyfriend sent me to the hospital. It was a really bad episode. I was able to get a restraining order. And so for the first time in my life at 21, I was in an apartment, which was just a hole in the wall. I had no car. I was on food stamps and social services on welfare. But I had my third child, which was a girl. I brought her home in a taxi. And if you would have knocked on my door at that moment and said, "Hey, Jess, how's your life?" I would have told you it was the best. Like, I was living the best life ever. But the truth was that was the best that was ever in my life at that time. Very shortly after I had my third child, my daughter, I met my now husband, Charlie, Deacon Charlie. And
see, Charlie, let's clarify this. Charlie is a deacon in the Catholic Church. Los Angeles, is he? Okay, in LA, and we talked earlier about the terrible problem of homelessness in LA. So you can see how this story is beginning to fit together, how God's putting the pieces together. He makes connections, folks, where we never think there's a connection. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So in this relationship with him, and this relationship is all about permanence, stability, authentic love, unconditional caring and love. And really treating me as a person should be treated. And I never really experienced that, so it was so different for me. But what that relationship did was it brought the truth to light about my life. And that was really difficult to face. So I went to therapy for 7 years trying to figure out what all this chaos inside me. It's a lot of times when you're homeless and you're surviving and you go through the experiences that I've been through, you tell yourself that that's what's normal. Like, that's normal. You don't want to know the truth about all the stuff that's happened to you and all the stuff that you've done, quite honestly, because it's too heavy to bear that truth. So in this relationship with my husband, I was able to face that truth and bear the weight of that truth so that I could get through to the next step, which is, forgiving myself, finding God. I hated God. First, I didn't really know truly if he existed. And second, if he did exist and he's seen everything that I've been through, what a sick joke he must be. Like, I didn't want anything to do with him. But in that relationship with my husband, especially looking, hindsight is amazing for us. I look back and I see God gave me his love through my husband in our marital promises, right? And that is where my healing truly began.
See, and that's the wonderful thing about marriage. Marriage exists to make each partner holier. And, a good marriage is a marriage when somebody can say, I was a good person when we got married. Now, 25 years later, 50 years later, I'm even a better person because I lived my life with this man and with this woman. So this is why marriage is so important and why marriage needs stability. And, when we get into, the program that Jess has established to help homeless children, we're going to see most of them come from either homes where there is a divorce or no marriage at all. And what does that do to the child? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, and of course, with a lack of money, you end up on the street.
That's right. And that's actually Sophisa. We started in 1999.
You got to tell us, Sophisa, we still want to know, what is the word? What does it mean?
I was called back out, go back out there, be their friend. Do you know how this feels? And I said no to it when I heard it the first 3 times. Now, granted, I'm not a believer in God yet when this calling kind of hit me. So I was like, nope, not going back out there. But I did after the 3rd time. It was very strong.
So the Holy Spirit was moving you out to the street. And Sophisa, all right, how'd you come up with a name?
Okay, so it was originally Sore Feet Saviors.
Okay, sore feet, okay.
Yes.
All right, folks, we solved the mystery now. Not even moi knew that.
The biggest request on the streets were socks. It wasn't food, and that's what we realized, that a lot of they were being fed. Food was abundant, but like socks and foot care items were the biggest request for us when we hit the streets. So in 2006, we encountered a homeless mother and a 9-month-old baby who was living in the alley of a hotel. And when we encountered her and heard her story, which is just absolutely, unbearable to repeat, but when we heard her story and saw the situation that she was in, that's when we really felt, my husband and I, we were called to focus solely on homeless families. And that's when we took our name, Sore Feet Saviors. We took it and took the first 2 letters of Sore Feet and Saviors and created Sophisa. So that's who we are. It's unique. We made up the name, and it's it's our identity in our service to families who are unhoused and who are experiencing this type of life in the streets of Los Angeles.
But you have a ton of people in LA on the streets. All right. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, as I said earlier in the program, there's tons and tons of government money, I suppose, and it's not doing much good, obviously, and you're still finding them on the streets. Now, what do? I mean, you don't have access to the mucho dinero. That's Spanish, folks. You didn't realize how bilingual I am. How do you do it?
We only run on private donations. We do not accept any government money. And our care model, right, when we encounter families, is based on our 3 founding principles. And our 3 founding principles are: 1, every action, every word, every encounter that we have is based foundationally on these. And 1, humans are sacred. All humans. It's that teaching of human dignity that I learned when I was healing about myself, right? I am a great idea of God. Everybody is a great idea of God, and that dignity cannot be taken no matter what. When you're on the streets, you feel shameful, you don't feel like you're worth anything, and that dignity is stripped from you based on those experiences. So our foundational one is humans are sacred. Our relationship with families, first and foremost, is for them to feel the true dignity that they carry. That's number 1. 2 is relationships are vital. What brought me off the streets, what healed me and encouraged me to make better decisions for myself, was a healthy, permanent relationship. We have relationships on the street, but they're unhealthy and they're disordered and they're deformed. And sometimes even in homes, we have unhealthy relationships. Families do. But what we offer to our families is a lifelong, permanent, healthy relationship.
Wait. You gotta explain this to me, because you're just like driving down the streets of LA or walking down the streets of LA and say, "Oh, hello, homeless person. I see you have a pretty little baby there, a little girl, a little boy. I want to help you." What do you do? What do you say?
Yeah, usually what helps is when there's a lingo, there's a talk, there's different ways that when I communicate with a family, they know I've been there. So a lot of times that's my first encounter, is showing them that I'm one of them in a sense, because life on the streets is transactional, and a lot of the other service providers that are out there outreaching are from secular or government agencies, and so it's a very transactional process. So what we do first is we create the relationship, and that takes a very long time. We build the trust. We put them up in a motel for 3 to 5 nights to get them off the streets, get them into a bed, a shower. We feed them, we buy them groceries, we pay their cell phone bill if their phone's off, we put gas in their car if they're in their car. So we satisfy the immediate physical needs, and we use that as a way to begin the relationship. And we tell our families from the beginning, like, we don't want anything from you but your friendship. That's it. Like, and we're going to do everything we can to give you the resources that you need to get you out of this situation. But ultimately, we're interested in providing a relationship with you so that you'll heal. Because people don't end up on the streets because they wake up one day and say, hey, I want to have a drug problem, or hey, I want to be homeless for the rest of my life.
Okay, but let me ask you now. Okay, so you go out and you meet these people. You got to gain their trust, but could it also be dangerous for you or for the people who are part of your organization? You really don't know who you're talking to, where you're taking them, and they could be dangerous.
Yes, of course. In those the situations that we go out and do outreach in, number one, if there's anything other than a female present, my husband is always with me, number one. And I don't know how else to explain it, but when you've lived on the streets, you're aware of the environment that you're going into. And so that's one of the things that Sophie said. That's actually our number 3 is you're the answer. I'm the answer. You're the answer, Father. Whoever's watching this, they're a part of the answer to healing homelessness. Homelessness is not something that needs to be solved. It's at the center of homelessness is a person, not a thing, right? So we solve things. We heal people.
How many cities are you present in?
We are present in actually 3 counties here in Southern California. So it's Kern County, Los Angeles County, and Orange County. So we have families in all of those counties that we are constantly interacting with and in a relationship with that we're helping. Okay, now,
how many people are part of your helping organization? You and your husband, and who else?
Yeah, so we're around 200 actual persons. We're at about 40 families right now that we are in active, healthy relationships and journeying with.
Well, that's fantastic. So you have 40 families. That's a pretty good number. And what kind of training do you give them? Because, as I said, you're dealing with a very, very different kind of a population. I mean, some of them might be, on drugs. Some of them might have alcohol problems. Some have mental problems. Some just are unfortunate and they just landed on the street. They got thrown out. They couldn't pay the rent.
That's right.
Okay.
The number one cause of homelessness is a catastrophic break in family. That's what it is. That person, if they have an existing drug addiction for whatever reason, usually childhood trauma, if they lost their job, that last person that they had contact with in their family, who was the last standing person who would help them, has finally kind of cut them off. That's usually how people end up on the streets. We have, if you can encounter a homeless person, someone who's been recently unhoused within the first usually 30 to 45 days, then the chances of bringing them out of homelessness they actually triple. It's after that 45-day mark where just the human brain and the human person needs to adjust to what they're living in. So that's key for us when we do outreach and we encounter, is this it's one of the things we think about in our approach is this a chronically homeless person or family, or is this someone who's been recently housed? So there's a lot of information to learn, which is a part of number 3, you're the answer. So one of the things that Sophisa is striving to do, and we're going to be releasing a lot more content in this next coming year, is educating the average person about homelessness. Because most people, when they think homelessness, they think of the drug-addicted person on the corner of the road, half-dressed with something, probably metal over their head, talking to themselves, or, with a needle in their arm. And yes, there is that demographic of homeless people, but the majority of homeless people are not like that. Their mental health issues have happened after they've become homeless, not before.
Suppose some of our folks watching the program today, they say, hey, I'd like to do something like that. Okay? how do you have a program that they could, say, I'm following the rules, I'm following the directions that Jess sent to me? Or we have a lot of wonderful folks that say, look, I'd like to contribute to that. I want to set one up in my town. And okay, how could they do that?
Yes, well, they can go to our website, sophisa.org. They can sign up to receive our newsletter. And our newsletter will have opportunities for them to watch a webinar or talk personally in a Q&A session with myself or one of our volunteers. So, our goal is to educate and what we call soften the earth. So, because that's what needs to happen. And no, it's not safe for someone who sees this and goes, yeah, I want to go help my homeless person, goes right out to the street and hands them a $20 bill.
Okay, yeah. See, folks, this is a commitment. This is a commitment, but some of you can make that kind of a commitment. And maybe you should talk to the pastors in your churches about this kind of a program, this kind of an outreach. What Jess is doing, what Sophisa is doing is a fantastic thing, and it's needed in our society more than ever. Jess, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I know you're for action, I'm for action, and I hope you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So, YouTube and you make a fine couple. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.